This week, the hunter becomes the hunted as we ascend the climbing wall of destiny and roll for initiative as we avoid the lava pits, or worse, the dishonor of becoming a dentist. This is the lowdown for Lower Decks. Good morning, all starships in the Alpha, Beta, Gamma, and Delta quadrants. This is the lowdown on Lower Decks. And I am your co host, Mr. Josh Pritchett, head of the Northern Virginia Star Trek meetup. And before we really get going, I want to send a special thank you to Mr. Drew Bittner for stepping up to the plate and covering for me last week. I was not feeling very good, but thank you very much, Drew, for stepping in at the last minute and covering for me. It was much appreciated. And now, my co host, BFF, and the guy I'm least likely to shove out an airlock, Mr. Chris Pabon.
Good morning to all the fans of the show. Bienvenidos a todos en este fin de semana del trabajador. Guten Morgen. Bonjour. Josh, always a pleasure to be here with you.
Same right back to you, my friend. How are you doing today?
Well, Josh, I want to say that you are the person I am least likely to yank his arm off and kill him with it to thus avoid you going to Stovall.
I appreciate that, my friend. I really do.
And I want to say another big shout out to Drew for stepping in last week. Thank you so very much.
Yes, thank you again, Drew. We much appreciate it, bud. So we had a really fun week here on Lower Decks, did we not?
We did, with a lot of flashbacks to the actually to the 90s with a certain board game.
Oh yes, and as you and I both know, we've played quite a bit of our tabletop board gaming in our time, and so it's nice to see that in the late 24th, early 25th centuries, tabletop board gaming is still a thing.
Game nights or game shifts.
Yes, even if it is kind of a rip off from the Ferengi, but we gotta love those big-eared guys. So, without further ado, I think we should take it to the max and recount what the highlights of this week's episode.
Let's roll.
Let's roll for initiative. So, as we were saying, our intrepid gang, Mariner, Beckett, and Boimler, and the rest of the gang were down in the repair bay, playing a board game that was narrated by Star Trek legend himself, Mr. John Hertzler, reprising his famous role as Chancellor Martok of the Klingon Empire. The premise of the game was sort of a D&D kind of, I guess, computer integrated thing. That, as Chris pointed out, was a shout out to the 90s. If people remembered a lot of games like Klingon Academy and Starfleet Academy, that they were basically tabletop games you played while watching a videotape of your favorite Star Trek characters acting out key scenes that inform the game. And Mariner is called by Jack to come up and prepare for the meeting, which is not for another hour, but he wants her to get there an hour early so she can be early for being early to the staff meeting. Essentially, they are heading down to a planet to repair some low orbiting elevators that because the planet's atmosphere is really bad for transport, the natives essentially built these elevators so that people could go up and be transported or meet starships to take them wherever. So the Cerrito has to fix these elevators. Jack gets the crazy idea to go ahead and send the engineering team on down to the planet to enjoy some R&R, while he and Mariner will stay up there and fix the elevator themselves. Chris, you want to take it from here?
Oh, I will, Josh, but I've got to like emulate Jack Ransom here and say they're orbital lifts. They're not elevators. Oh my.
Okay. they're lifts.
So there's two tracks to this episode. One is about what's happening with the people at the orbital lift and on the planet, which is Dulain, and it's a society that is based on wellness. And then you have the track of Boimler, who's trying to break out of being, shall we say, safe Boimler and trying to be bold Boimler, because when they're all playing the board game, he finds out that Vendom has been promoted, which is a character we've seen before. And he's like, that can't be right. And now he's captain. And Tandy explains to him, like, well, he was always saying yes to things. And, that got him noticed. And Boyne was like, but every move I do is calculated to make sure that I will be on the captain's track. And he realizes, maybe what he's been doing up till now is wrong. And so he is talking again about this with Tandy, and he gets opportunity to go play spring ball. And at first he's like, I'm not going to go play like some sweaty game. And then Tandy's like, but Boimler, come on, remember. And then he decides that he's going to go do the game. And many of you may remember that it's the same game that Riker played with his dad in the second season of Next Generation. And so he goes, and of course, he's completely useless. And he, at one point, just like gets boiled over by Jax, a big Bajoran security officer. And Jax is like, well, you are really impressive. And he's like, was that because of like, how I played the game? It's like, no, it's because how you scream. Like, I had a Bajoran choir, and we need a soprano. Would you be interested? And so Boimler's like, okay, I'll give it a try. Because remember, this is Boimler trying to do new things. And so since it's a Bajoran choir, it's quite sad. But he manages to like impress Jax, and then he's about to leave, and then he gets an offer to go to an artist class to be a model. And so this all like, brings up his confidence. And later on, he's at the bar, and he's like talking to Tandy, and he say, I really feel inspired. Like the next person I run into, I'm going to say yes. And Tandy's like, well, maybe you ought to practice some moderation here. And he's like, no, I'm Boimler. I'm going to go ahead and do it. And so as a consequence of the orbital lift being down, all the people that with that specific lift are like cooling their heels and 10 forward. And so this huge menacing looking alien called Crench comes up to Tandy and him at the bar and says, excuse me, but, I was going to go down to do a hunt, and my species is like, very motivated by the hunt, an homage to Predator. And he's saying, but, I can't get down to the planet. My urge is kind of building. Would one of you like want to be my prey? And, Tandy's like, no, thank you. Like maybe you could go see Doctor, and she could like, do something about this urge. And Boyne was like, yeah, I'll do it. And he's like, really? And he's like, yes. And so he takes off his mask, and he looks ultra menacing, and he like, breaks out a tooth that, just makes a mark on Boimler's forehead and says like, okay, you are prey now. And the hunt starts in an hour. And Boimler's like, well, I guess it'll just be okay. And Ted's like, what are you doing, you fool? You only have an hour. Run. And so later Boimler tries to go and talk to Crench, and Crench is like, the hunt has started now. And so he's very serious about this, and he's chasing him, and Boimler's running to the ship, and we get a shout out to the Dalton Ops for navigation, and they're like, don't jump in here with your dirty shoes. And he finds the captain. It's like, Captain, I'm being hunted. He's like, I won't have that. Security. And he's like, oh, thank goodness. And then he says, I'm being hunted by this alien called Crench. And she's like, oh, Crench, no, cancel that. Like, he's such a great guy. We had mimosas over brunch. No, you've got to respect his cultural traditions. So Boimler is completely screwed here. And meanwhile, we've got stuff going on the orbital platform. But Josh, why don't you take us to the orbital platform?
Okay, so Jack and Mariner are up on the platform. they're bungling around trying to get the lift to work again. It is clear they are out of their depth. Meanwhile, our engineering team is down there. At first, they're having a really good time, and then, of course, they make a cultural taboo where they are about to participate in something, and they were supposed to show their belly buttons, and they didn't realize they weren't supposed to, that they didn't do that, and so now they are in deep hot lava, or about to be in lava, as it turns out. So Jack at first is kind of like, yeah, they'll figure it out. Mariner's not so sure. So of course, being Mariner, she grabs a orbital spacesuit and a parachute, jumps out. She gets about halfway down, and Jack calls her up and says, hey, I just realized maybe we ought to go down there and help the guys out. So she pulls her chute early, grabs a hold of one of the railings, gets back inside the lift tower, and realizes how far down she's gone. So she starts running up the stairs, gets about halfway there, finds she's got to go up a ladder. Then she's got to go up a climbing wall. She's completely winded, obviously, when she gets there. Luckily, Jack doesn't seem any the wiser. And so they put on spacesuits again, jump out. Mariner, being Mariner, dozes off, has her about halfway down, and then suddenly they wake up when they get down there, and they are about to put the engineering team into a hot, massive volcano. Apparently, the planet is ruled by an godlike AI and a telepathic baby, and also the volcano ascension. So this is classic Trek form right here. And since the planet's culture is based on wellness, Jack rips his shirt off and shows off his massive six-pack and pectorals, which apparently appeases everybody. And so, yay, the engineering team is saved. So they can now go back up and fix the orbital platform. The orbital lifts. Meanwhile, back up on the ship, Boimler is trying to escape Crinch and ends up running back into the repair bay and accidentally turns the game back on, where Chancellor Martok gives him an inspirational speech about how he needs to take the initiative and fight like a warrior. Even though he may die, he will die with honor. And Boimler embraces this, puts on some greasy war paint, puts a guacamole bowl at his head as a helmet, and picks up a phaser rifle and chases after Crinch and announces, Crinch, you are now the prey, and I am the hunter. Suddenly, Crinch throws a spear into his side and pulls out a selfie stick and takes a picture of them and tells him, oh, don't worry, we just play catch and release. We don't, we're not really into killing prey. We just catch and release. I do have some notes and, basically express that Boimler was actually really good prey. It's, one or two things he thinks he should change for in the future. So that's kind of where that is. Chris, you want to bring us home here?
So the episode ends that after Trent takes two selfies, the final one for the boys back home, they're back where they started at the board game, and Boimler comes in and he says, well, I'm feeling okay. I might lose some feeling in the shoulder. And Tandy's like, so you've learned what you're going to do here for on out. And he says, well, I'm still going to be like, Boil Boimler. And so he says, I am going to always be mindful of, just doing something bold. And so he takes the dice and says, I'm going to walk into the bar and I'm going to demand blood wine. And he throws the dice, and General Martok says, the bartender's not impressed, and takes your arm and rips it off and uses it to stab you. And technically, since you die by your own hand, you will not go to Sto-vo-kor. And then, as many of us have experienced in our lives, we get a note that says like, if you want to keep on playing, you can pay more and get like the expansion pack, or you can have like a subscription to the entire series. That's how the episode ends. Scene.
Yeah, and terrific episode as always with our friends at Lower Decks. And so now I think we shall get into the good, the bad, and the Gorn. But joining us this week,
Yes.
we have a special guest. Joining us is Mr. Miles Connor. Miles,
Hey,
welcome,
how's it going?
sir. Good to see you.
Yeah,
How you
likewise.
doing? How you doing
I'm
today?
good. I'm good.
Great.
I'm just sitting around to watch the Formula One race this morning and Lower Decks the night before. So yeah, it's been good.
Okay. So anybody in particular you're rooting for the Formula One race?
Well, I'm hoping that Ferrari stops making some terrible mistakes because it's been rough this season. But you know, no chance Max doesn't make it. That's all.
Yeah. Well, I'm such a nerd.
Team Hamilton.
I have no idea.
He was close to winning
Okay.
today too. It was really unfortunate.
So, Miles, we have invited you here today to join us for our little segment we like to call the good, the bad, and the Gorn. So, it's just very self-explanatory. And so, since you are our guest, would you like to tell us some of the things you really liked about this week's episode?
Yeah, sure. I thought this episode was really good. I thought it was like a kind of a good return to form for Lower Decks. I mean, we've only had one previous episode this season yet, and that episode did a lot of kind of like plot legwork to kind of return things to kind of the normal status quo. Just because it was the direct follow up to the season finale from last season, and that was also great. I think the season finale from last season was one of the best episodes the show has ever done, largely because it wasn't, super funny at all times and actually told just a really good Star Trek story. And I think that, having to follow that up and then kind of get back slowly in this season into the groove of kind of your normal Lower Decks episode has been an interesting transition to watch. And I think now we're right back at the point where it just feels like, episode in a bottle, just a simple, clean, funny story with like an A plot and a B plot. That's what I want from Lower Decks, and I think they did a great job this episode.
I agree. I think it was very well written and very funny. And I think, I think, I'm beginning to really think that we are to a point with Star Trek that I think it works better as an episodic thing, not with a big overarching season storyline like they've done with Discovery and Picard. I think with
Totally
Strange
agree.
New Worlds, I mean, it's good to have one plot line that runs through the series that ties the show together, that makes it different from the Star Trek shows before.
Of course.
Like what you got with Prodigy, where you got a bunch of lost kids trying to find a home on this Federation starship they found. But at the same time, there's still all these adventures that are going on and people that they're meeting. But I think Star Trek, the formula does work better as a episodic television series. Chris, what do you think?
There's much that I liked about this episode. I like how we're seeing Mariner's transformation, and would she have come back after Jack calls her when she's doing the space dive? The old Mariner, I'm not so sure, but this new Mariner that we're beginning to see, I'm liking it. I like the fact that she came back. I think that's showing that there's some evolution we're seeing with the character, but how she's under ransom. She's finally beginning to learn to to trust her commanding officer, to trust the system, because that was the big thing about the season opener. Like she wasn't trusting Starfleet to do the right thing, because in her mind, sort of, no one can do the right thing except her. So we're seeing some gradual evolution of the character. Another thing I liked was, as we mentioned, the nod to board games. I mean, and to a board game night, or as I said, shift in this case. I mean, I think it's a huge part of our culture. And there's a lot of emphasis on, the video games, and video games are great too, don't get me wrong. But I think not enough attention is placed on the fact that there's still a lot of us out there who organize game nights and get together with board games. I mean, board games, they've not gone away. It's just still a huge thing.
If anything, they're having like a huge moment right now.
Yes, it is a renaissance. That's right.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. I mean, you obviously have Settlers of Catan and
An immortal classic. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. I mean, there's that, and certainly, I mean, there's about 100 different iterations of Monopoly and Clue each.
Sure. And then on like the tabletop front, I mean,
Yes.
you've got huge media now that is, referencing and, actively promoting stuff like Dungeons and Dragons. And I mean, this episode is a great example of that. I mean, the name of the game abbreviates to B&B. It's a clear nod to, the Wizards property, and it's great. I think it's fun that, it's becoming kind of this bigger cultural mainstay.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, you have movies coming out. You've got the Chris Pine Dungeons and Dragons movie coming out next year. I mean, we have the Jumanji movies. I mean, and I also just like seeing General Martok here in this board game because, as many of you remember, we had the TNG game that Milton Bradley put together that had Robert O'Reilly in there, not as his Goron character, but as another one. And you slipped in the VCR tape, and he was like yelling. So it was a nice homage. And the other thing I liked was the subtle nod to not only Predator in this episode, down to Boingo streaking his face with whatever it was, guacamole or black beans or whatever it was. But I also liked the wig to like the overkill, right? Because even Mariner says that I think this is a bit of overkill when you have a sentient volcano, an evil AI, a psychic baby. I mean, it's
just totally absurd.
Totally absurd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, yeah, it's like a love letter to the original series. It's like, yeah, those are kind of the stereotypical, rulers of primitive planets that we always see to encounter during the Kirk years. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
and I think Lower Decks is a show built around understanding and subverting, the tropes of Star Trek. And this is like the perfect pinnacle example of that. It's like they set up every possible trope just to subvert them. And also just I love that even they engineered a situation where the taking the shirt off in the heat of the moment was not just like something that happened, but actually was like materially useful and like benefited the situation. I thought that was great. And it was just justified enough for it to make sense and be very funny. It was, I thought, very well done.
Your lava tubes are perfect.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I think Captain Kirk would argue that his sex life was integral to the survival of the crew of the Enterprise.
Absolutely.
What else did we really enjoy? I mean, I don't think I've got very many complaints about this show. I mean, this episode. I mean,
I always love a nod to the Cetacean Corps because I think that was just so inspired and brilliant. And I love the fact that they're like, don't dive in here with your dirty shoes because you want to keep a clean pool. It's so absurd, and yet it totally works.
Yeah. And why do you have a pool of dolphins on a spaceship? We just do.
And I mean, I also love the mention of brunch and mimosas. Who doesn't like a good brunch and mimosas?
Absolutely. And again, the expectation subversion. You've got this like, creepy, scary hunter, and then of course, as soon as the captain learns that that's who it is, oh, what are you talking about? He's a great guy. Like I love that. It's adorable.
Yeah, there are guys that do like to go hunting and do like their mimosa brunches.
Yeah, exactly.
It's conundrum. Yeah. So, but it's a sign of civilization. I think once you hit brunch and mimosas, you hit a pinnacle of human civilization, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, do we have anything bad? Anything we would have liked to have seen a little differently?
Not necessarily like an explicit complaint or something I think the show did wrong, but I think I do definitely want to see I think even a little more consequence for Mariner. I think in this moment, we saw her kind of abort her, one-man plan, which I think is definitely indicative of some character growth. But the fact that she kind of totally got away with it and Ransom was none the wiser, I think is a little unfortunate. I think I would have maybe appreciated if the ruse had failed in some capacity and Ransom had been, upset with her. I think that would have been a more, another potential meaningful vector for character growth.
Yeah, that's interesting. Chris?
In general, I really like this episode. So this is just some subtle nitpicking, such as when they're talking about the Martok character and the Ferengi game that he's downloaded. They mentioned, yeah, like I'm still trying to get Gowron, but Gowron at this point is dead because we know that Worf killed him. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of like, there wouldn't be a Gowron because it's only Martok now. That's why he's the chancellor of the Klingon Empire. So minor nitpick there that probably should not have mentioned Gowron. The other nitpick would be the orbital space platforms, which is like I loved, but couldn't they have just taken them to another orbital platform? Because it looks like there's several of them on there, unless that was the only way to access that specific island. But just take them to another orbital platform while you're repairing that one, and then they can still go down to the planet. At least
That's a good point. They clearly
know.
have the infrastructure for it.
Yeah, at least for
You see
Crench.
multiple ones in the same shot, so
Yeah, at least for Crench, he still could have gone down to the planet. I mean, I know we needed him for this episode for the hunt and everything, but again, I just want to say these are minor nitpickings. In general, I really liked the episode because I thought it was kind of like it was so intense and so much going on in the season premiere, as Miles mentioned, that you sort of needed a little cool down to get back to like regular Lower Decks.
the only other thing,
Yeah.
And this is again also super minor because I understand that not every episode can have like major meaningful plot lines for every character, but I want more Rutherford and I want more Tendi. They're both great characters, and I think that they were underutilized in this episode.
Yeah, we haven't seen really Dr. Tamani in about two
Dr.
episodes now.
Tana is just like missing in action.
True.
Yeah, that was going to be my complaint right there. Was not enough Dr. Tavani. I mean, I'm sorry. She's overall one of my favorite characters. I mean, they all are, but she cracks me up. And I think, Chris, this past shore leave, wasn't there somebody dressed up as Dr. Tavani?
I didn't see it. I mean, it probably was. I didn't see it.
Yeah, but it's just such a funny character, and I was disappointed. I realized later, we needed more Tavani, so I need me some more of that.
I mean, again, this is very minor nitpicking. Two other things. One is, was it just me or the baby had no legs?
Yeah, I think that was a deliberate choice, but also totally unexplained.
Yeah. I also would have liked to see, and maybe it's going to come in other episodes, but if you remember in the finale of last season, like Mariner sort of buries the hatchet and becomes friends with that Andorian ensign, and I would like to see a pick up of that relationship a little bit more.
I had totally forgotten about that plot line, but yeah, that definitely seemed like it was setting up either the introduction of a new character or at least like, some kind of callback, and we haven't seen that yet. You're right.
Yeah, the character Jennifer the Andoria. That's why that it's out. Yeah. I agree because there's not, and even though I identify as Klingon, I don't think there's near as much Andorian representation. I mean, we had Shran way back on Enterprise, but we still, it's been a while, and of course we had he wasn't really Andorian, but we had Bruce Hertz's character Hemmer on Strange New Worlds, but he's been kind of the closest we've had as an Andorian representative on the show.
And I know it's not really within the purview of this particular episode, but I was very disappointed with how they wrote him out of Strange New Worlds.
Yeah,
one that they did it at all, and then two, the manner in which they did it, I felt did not really work for me.
Well, I appreciated him having a heroic passing, but at the same time, I did not want his character to leave. He became really my, outside of Spock and Pike, he really did become my favorite character.
Yeah, and especially after doing all that legwork between him and Uhura and building up that relationship, I was just sad to see him go. It was very unfortunate.
Yeah. So I think that, that was rough. So anyway, moving into the Gorn phase of our discussion, another thing I really liked, going back to the Bajoran chants. I thought that's something new. I don't think we ever saw that on DS9, but I think that is, you got to figure that given the sad history of Bajor, something like that would be a thing.
They would have a lot of funeral dirges to sing. That's true.
Yes, and honoring the prophets. That's really intense, and I like that. I hope we get some more Bajoran dirging in the future. I think that's really intense stuff there.
Yeah. I also just like that they're kind of hanging a lantern on the the like cultural origins of every character in the cast, right? I mean, the fact that like Shax being a Bajoran is not just like a fun reference to a previous Star Trek show, but is actually like an important part of his character. I think that's really cool.
Yeah. It's just so nice to see all these different non-human types that we had in so many
definitely.
Star Trek shows throughout the history coming back together now throughout this in the more recent shows, particularly Lower Decks and Strange New Worlds. I mean, we've had Bolians, Andorians, Trill, Bajorans, Klingons, Romulans. Everybody has been coming back, and that's nice. Plus, I'm sure there's a lot of new aliens. There's a lot, especially on Strange New Worlds, that we've seen, and I think that given the fact that they're employing both animation on Lower Decks and Prodigy, and then on Strange New Worlds they're using puppeteering, that gives us so much more room to create any alien of our imagination. They're only limited by their imaginations of what they can and cannot create at this point.
Yeah, Prodigy especially needs a shout out for that because they've done such a good job of having like the central cast be so physically different, like races that are truly alien feeling in a way that Star Trek typically hasn't had the resources to achieve. That's been really fun to see. I mean, the fact that you have a character who's literally just a gas in a ball, I mean, that's awesome.
Yeah, the Medusan. Yeah, I love it. And I think that I mean, we're not limited anymore. I think by budgets and stuff. I mean, I've talked with a lot of people over how so much of the original Star Trek was just whatever they could find on the Paramount lot.
Yep. And leftover styrofoam rocks, paint them up, throw them in the scene, whatever.
Yeah. Gangster costumes that were left over from some James Cagney movie that was made 20 years before. Let's do that. Oh, we've got some Nazi uniforms from a World War II film. Use them. We got this stuff from a Gladiator film we did a couple years ago. Okay, great. Let's make an episode with that. It really got ridiculous after a while. So
one of the
Chris,
things,
you want to throw something in here?
Yeah, one of the things I liked about this episode was how it emphasizes how difficult it can be to understand and grasp cultural norms. Like a lot of times you see them going down, and what's because first contact has already been made. People instantly know what to do, and most importantly, what not to do. And it seems like, anyone can do this. And no, they can't. I mean, they put the engineers down there, and at first it seems everything is going fine. But respecting cultural beliefs can be a real minefield, and you have to be really careful. And they're not trained for that, and it's so easy to go from like, because my belly button's an inner versus an outer, and then all of a sudden a crisis breaks out. But I liked how they showed us that it takes a lot of work, and not just anyone can. And I think that's something we see even in our society now, that it's so easy if you're not careful to put the wrong foot forward. And it's not just just like gospel parlay, although I guess parlay is good to clear things up. But one can enter with one's own beliefs of how things should be, but this should be open to like learning about how the beliefs of others are. And it was a wellness. I like this wellness-based society act. I thought it was a really great concept. And again, a shout out to the climbing wall that they have in the lift. But I thought it was a nice nod to like, okay, like you have to, before interacting with the culture, you have to understand the culture.
And the way that was reflected as well in the plot with Boimler, that was also it's the same theme being reflected in the A and the B plot. But yeah, that's a really good point, and I think it's also worth recognizing that, like, the resolution for the A plot or I mean, I don't know if there's defined A or B plots, but the resolution of the plot with Ransom going down there and finally admitting, okay, maybe I shouldn't have sent the engineers to do a diplomat's job. I like the fact that, even though the resolution was kind of silly and goofy of him, just suddenly taking off his shirt and that fixing the issues, it makes sense because he did recognize that their culture values a particular thing that he can perform at that the others can't, and used that to smooth over a diplomatic situation. And it's like, that's a really good representation of kind of the diplomatic engine of Starfleet firing on all cylinders. And that's great.
Yeah. I mean, clearly Ransom and Freeman are trained more in diplomatic situations
Exactly.
than
Yeah.
Rutherford would be. Which is why, remember back again, shouting out to the original series, you clearly didn't put Scotty in a diplomatic situation unless it required drinking the other diplomat under the table. Then, okay, here's our guy. But
it falls under this looks easy, but it's actually really hard.
Yeah, exactly.
It really is. And, and just to cite another favorite engineer of Star Trek, Miles O'Brien, occasionally did. Yes. Thought you get that, Connor. Thought you get that, Miles. How, he would sometimes have to step up and do a diplomatic thing, even though he was clearly uncomfortable with it, but he knew it had to be done.
Exactly.
And he was the man who had to do it, which is why Miles O'Brien is the most important man in Starfleet history, Yeah. So at any rate, well, so I guess we're coming into the fan theories, and before we get into that, we got a very big overarching bunch of theories about what could happen on this Thursday, because as we all know, it's Paramount Star Trek Day.
Oh yeah.
Yes, in which we are going to see all kinds of big announcements, new trailers, and cool stuff that's going to take us to the end of 2022 and then into the first 3 quarters of 2023. So, with that in mind, Chris, what theories do you see coming up for Lower Decks or Star Trek in general?
I'll go with the macro and then I'll go to the micro. On the macro, I think what we're going to see this Thursday is release dates for 2023 for all the series. And I think we will also see a trailer either for season 2 of Strange New Worlds, or we'll see a trailer for the new season of Discovery. That's my macro vision. And then on a micro vision, well, last week I said that I hoped that we'd see the evil AI again. And so I sort of got my wish this episode because we saw an AI. I mean, it's debatable based on the cultural norms if it's like evil or good. But I'm going to go out and say that my prediction is that we are going to see Jennifer the Andorian again.
Okay, Miles?
Yeah, I mean, more or less in line with what Chris said. I think it's pretty likely that we get trailers or announcements of the next seasons of the existing series this Thursday. I would be interested, especially to see if they announce any new properties within the Star Trek franchise. Seems unlikely. I don't know. They've clearly got kind of a pretty good core set now of new shows and kind of the new Trek era, but I have always wanted, and I stand by this, just a pure like political drama set in Star Trek. I think that what they have done, what Paramount has done in the last couple of years, has been awesome in terms of establishing that Star Trek you can tell basically any story you want in the context of Star Trek, right? I mean, Prodigy, Discovery, Lower Decks, and Picard are all very different shows, and Strange New Worlds. With very different kind of core themes that all factor into Star Trek as a larger whole. But I want to explore that further. I want to see, like, completely different shows, completely different like plot structures explored in the context of Star Trek. And I think that a story set within like Federation leadership would be awesome. Just like the West Wing, but for Starfleet. That'd be sick. I want that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Miles. I too would like to see something like that. I do think we will see announcements for other shows. Specifically, I think we're finally going to get an announcement on Michelle Yao's Star Trek Section 31 series, which I think could actually tie into that idea. With the ending of Picard, I think they will have room for another show. I also think there are rumors that this 5th season of Discovery might be its finale, but that's not a bad thing. Or, I mean, I would hate to see it go, but at the same time, 5 years, I think, is pretty much the half-life on a lot of shows. So we might see an ending to that. But I think we will see trailers for Strange New Worlds, Discovery, a new one for Picard, a trailer for Prodigy, and I think a lot of bigger hints about, who all is going to be on Picard. For Lower Decks, I think we will be seeing a lot more shout outs to earlier shows. I do know that we have one really big one coming up that we saw in the trailers where they go to Deep Space Nine.
That's going to be really fun.
So just a warning to everybody, I will be crying because for me, going to Deep Space Nine is going to be like going home. Okay, that's home. That is my home. And so I'm going to cry a little bit for that episode. Meanwhile, I think that, we're going to continue to have a lot of fun going forward for the remainder of this season. And just, really enjoying our team of intrepid explorers aboard the USS Cerritos. And
personally, I'm also super excited to see how they handle the Lower Decks and Strange New Worlds crossover.
Yeah,
I can't wait to see Jack Quaid and Tawny Newsome like in full Starfleet uniform on screen. That's just going to be so fun.
It's going to be sweet. Well, according to an interview, Jack Quaid and Ethan Peck have now become buds.
Oh, that doesn't
they got a big giant bromance going on here.
I love that.
Yeah, so we're pretty excited for that. And
the question I would have is, in animation, is how much larger will Anson Mount's hair get?
How much higher will Pike's Peak grow?
Yeah.
On Lower Decks. To be able to get into the turbo lift with that thing.
Just bonking his head on every door sill.
Okay, I have to ask, am I the only one who's calling Anson Mott's hair Pike's Peak?
That's a great coinage.
It is.
All right, because if I'm not, I want everybody to start doing it. We just spread it out.
Oh,
on
absolutely,
the internet.
absolutely.
Just spread it out. It's Pike's Peak. Okay, and I'm gonna make one other prediction. This is not necessarily Star Trek, but it's Star Trek adjacent. I predict that NASA will fix the problems aboard the Artemis, and we are going to have a historic launch this week.
Fingers crossed.
We are keeping our fingers on it that we're going to light this candle.
I mean,
Failure is not an option, people.
It's like they outsourced to the Ferengi.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe Jack and Beckett are fixing this thing.
Well, okay, fingers crossed that that's not the case.
Yeah.
Let's hope not. Somebody get Miles O'Brien on the phone. We need him right away.
We're pulling you back in for one last job.
Yeah, I called him back in. Okay, so I guess we're ready to wrap this up. Miles, would you like to tell us where folks can reach you and anything you got going on you want to share with us today?
Yeah, so on the subject of tabletop games, I do routinely star on another podcast called RPG Stress Test, which is a lot of fun. You can follow that on Twitter. Just search RPG Stress Test. And then I'm also on Twitter at Eldritch_Elk.
Okay, excellent. Chris, what do you got for us?
Thank you, everyone, for once again taking the time to watch our cast. You can find me on Instagram at Verde Cosplay, and I if you want to see like the latest cosplay from the cons around the DC area, come to my gram.
And once again, you can reach me on my Facebook page, Josh Pridgett Jr., or through the Star Trek Northern Virginia Star Trek meetup group, which today, just a quick plug, we will be having a special meetup event at 4 p.m. at the AMC Theater at Tice's Corner, where they will be showing the Turner Classic Movies special director's cut of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan,
Oh,
starring the great one himself, William Shatner, Ricardo Montalban, Leonard Nimoy, and Dee Kelly, and the even greater one herself, Nichelle Nichols. So everybody, if in the sound of my voice, please come join us. My book, Bigfoot and Other Tales of the Supernatural, is still available on Amazon and Kindle. Until next week, I remain Josh Pridgett with my co-host Chris Pabone. And once again, thank you, Miles Connor, for joining us.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Anytime. Live long and prosper, everybody.
Peace and long life. Safe drive back from DragonCon.